Okay, good. It is straight up 1:30. It looks like we have City of Oakdale, Oakdale Irrigation District, Stanislaus County, and Modesto Irrigation District. So let's go ahead and get started out of respect for folks' time, as we have a busy agenda today. So let's go ahead and, again, straight up 1:30, let's call the meeting to order. Is there any public comment today? Looks like we have about 10 folks on the line. Any public comment? Okay, seeing none, let's move to item number 3 on the agenda, which is approval of our March 10th, 2021 meeting minutes. And I'll look for a motion to approve those minutes.
Renfro motion.
Thank you, Michael. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Eric. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. Item number 4 on the agenda is a letter of support for a Water Smart grant. Gordon, can you give us a little bit? I know the background is going to be perhaps limited, but give us the limited background that you do have on this item.
Sure. Yeah, good morning, Gordon Enos, MID. Stockton East Water District is applying to the Bureau of Reclamation's Applied Science Grant Program to fund the East Side Groundwater Use Measurement Project. And Reclamation's grant program provides funding to non-federal entities for the development of tools and information to support water management for multiple uses. Eligible projects include the development of modeling and forecasting tools, hydrologic data platforms, and new data sets. And the purpose of the Eastside Groundwater Use Measurement Project is to produce spatial and temporal maps of monthly evapotranspiration and estimate groundwater pumping using the net-to/from groundwater methodology as an alternative to metering groundwater pumping within the boundary of Stockton East Water District, North San Joaquin Water Conservation District, and Central San Joaquin Water Conservation District boundaries. And the data provided by the project is critical for conjunctive use management, accurate groundwater use, and their groundwater sustainability plan reporting. So with that background, GSA staff requests approval, and at the request of the Stockton East Water District, GSA staff requests approval from the STRGBA GSA to submit the attached letter, which was attached to the handouts for today, to support, in support of reclamation on behalf of Stockton East Water District, recommending this project be considered under the Applied Science Grant Program. And that's all I had on that.
Thank you, Gordon. Are there questions with respect to the letter of support? Okay, I think we should help out our neighbors anytime that we can. They help us out in turn. So if there are no further questions or comments, can I get a motion to approve execution of the letter of support?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Eric. Is there a second?
Walt, second.
Thank you, Walt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we will get that out the door today or tomorrow. Thank you for that. Gordon, stay on the hot seat, if you will. We'll move to item number 5, which is a board agenda packet, which should have gone out with the information for this meeting related to seawater intrusion. And give us a quick review, Gordon. And I know Phyllis is on the line to the extent there are additional technical questions, but go ahead.
Okay. So at the, if you remember at the January 13th, 2021 Technical Advisory Committee meeting, Todd Groundwater gave a presentation on sustainable management criteria and the 6 sustainability indicators. And during the discussion on the seawater intrusion sustainability indicator, Todd or Phyllis mentioned that this indicator might not be applicable to the Modesto subbasin. And since then, Phyllis has provided a technical memo, which was included in today's meeting handouts, describing the rationale for eliminating seawater intrusion from the list of applicable sustainability indicators. So GSA staff has prepared this agenda report, which is also included in today's handouts, which requests the STRGBA GSA to make a determination that seawater intrusion does not exist and is not likely to occur in the future, and therefore a seawater intrusion sustainability indicator is not applicable in the Modesto subbasin. And I don't know if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Gordon. I assume that what you just read was the intended or a recommended action?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions for Gordon? Let's start first with member agencies. Okay, see none. Are there any questions or comments from public that may be in attendance? Okay, I don't see any. Gordon, can you go ahead and just restate the recommended action if you would?
Sure. We request the STRGBA GSA make a determination that seawater intrusion does not exist and is not likely to occur in the future, and therefore a seawater intrusion sustainability indicator is not applicable in the Modesto subbasin.
Thank you. Can I get a motion to approve the recommended action as Gordon has stated?
Move approval.
Thank
I'll second.
you. Thank you, Walt and Michael. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? Fair enough. The motion or the motion's carried. The resolution is passed. Item number 6 on the agenda today is an update on the budget and schedule. And Gordon, again, we'll turn to you.
Okay, so as you can see in the handout, to date, the Todd Groundwater team has expended 55% of the budget and about 74% of the time schedule. And so we're getting close to wrapping up we have about 7 or 8 more months left on the schedule. So we're drawing things to a close here.
Okay, thank you, Gordon. Are there questions for Gordon? Okay, thank you. Let's move to item number 7 on the GSA agenda for today, which is a public outreach update. Sam, shall I start with you?
I think Gordon's actually going to kick us off on this one
Okay.
again.
All right.
Great, I can go first again. Okay, so
That's what I get for trying to mix things up. Huh? Go ahead.
probably getting tired of hearing me talk, but anyway.
No, not at all. Not at all.
So the first one, just an update on our office hour session. You know, we held our first office hour session on March 25th, and we really appreciate all those who were able to attend, as well as the questions and comments that we received during that session. We recognize that the session didn't go as well as we'd hoped, so we're in the process of making changes for the next session, including an introductory presentation targeting specific issues. We're also going to use in the different format in Zoom, it's called a meeting format rather than a webinar format. And that hopefully will allow better audience participation. And then we're also at the request of some of the attendees we're going to record the presentation to enable people who couldn't attend to hear the discussion at their leisure. And then also finally, we're going to include participation in the office hours by the technical team. So we're planning on holding the next office hour session at the end of April. We haven't put together an exact date yet, but it'll be toward the end of the month. So that's all.
Thank you for that, Gordon. Just one observation on my side as well with respect to the office hours. The only thing, and again, there's a host of changes that I think will be made. Another important one is I found, sort of the lulls in the question and answer to be a bit cumbersome. So I think we're going to work to try and prepare a list of questions ahead of time to ask the participants, in the event that we get to where there's a lull in the discussion. And then the second thing I would add is, you mentioned that our second office hours will be at the end of April. As it sits today, we're at April 14. So let's not wait too long to get that on the calendar so that folks can plan accordingly to participate. So.
Good. Yeah,
Thank you.
good point. Just one more thing for me before I turn over to Sam. The GSA did get final approval. We had requested a DWR, an amendment to DWR's Facilitation Support Services Program, and they approved our requested amendment to our implementation service plan. And the Facilitation Support Services Program pays for meeting facilitation services, informational material preparation, and interbasin coordination support. So this amendment will add additional scope to this plan to extend the period of performance through the end of January of next year. So through the end of when we turn in our GSP, and will also increase the total number of labor hours. But we will continue to be using the services of Stantec, who's been our consultant up to this point.
Okay, thank you, Gordon.
Welcome.
Sam?
Yeah, and I just wanted to add in that it's probably time for us to put out another issue of the newsletter. It's been a It's been at least 6 months since our last newsletter. And then I know a couple months ago, we put out the fact sheet with Turlock Subbasin. I know that I have a running list of potential topics that we've kind of been keeping track of throughout the past few meetings. But if anyone else has any article ideas or even want to help out in writing something, just let myself or Gordon know and we'd be happy to include it.
Well, let's just pause there for a minute if we can, and maybe folks have immediate thoughts with respect to articles that we should be included in this edition. So member agencies, do you guys have immediate ideas for Sam? Quiet group today.
I think we need to talk about the monitoring wells. I mean, I think those are nearing complete, if not, I think they're pretty much done at this point.
Yeah, Miguel's going to give us an update today, but my recollection is we're sort of 80% of the way there, and we should be 100% of the way there in a couple of weeks. So not to steal Miguel's thunder, but that's a good idea, Eric. Okay. All right. Well, let's not belabor the point today, folks. Please do be thinking about subject matters that we should cover, and get those thoughts and ideas over to Sam, and she'll get us pointed in the right direction. Okay, anything further, Sam?
Nope, not for me.
Okay, thank you. And Gordon, thank you as well. Speaking of monitoring wells, let's move to item number 8 on the GSA agenda for today, which is a monitoring well update. Liz is lucky enough to be on vacation, so Miguel's going to give that update for us. Miguel, you have your hand up, but you're muted. Miguel, you there? Okay, let's skip over Miguel. Phyllis, do you want to step in at this point? Do you know where we stand?
Sure.
Thank
I'll just give a very I'll just give a very brief update. So as you mentioned, we're well a ways away here in getting everything completed. We have completed wells 6 through 10. And remember, 7, 8, 9, and 10 are all in the eastern subbasin. So those were the wells we wanted to get in place as soon as we could, get monitoring going for those wells. And so those are done. We also have completed well 3, which is in the South Modesto area, leaving wells 1, 2, and 5 to do. And so wells 1 and 2 are in the western subbasin near Modesto, and well 5 is up at I believe it's up at Oakdale. And one of the things that we are doing also is looking very carefully at our budget as we go, trying to see if there are funds remaining for one additional well. And we are continuing to look carefully at the numbers and see if that can happen. And if it does, we are permitting a location for that potential additional well in the community of Empire near the river. So this monitoring program is 3 wells shy of being completed, and going to be providing us some really great information for the GSP.
Well, thank you for that, Phyllis, and just a quick apology on my behalf, because I do have at least one director on and a couple of members of the public who listened to my review of our groundwater activities at MID's board meeting yesterday, and I reported that there were 8 done and 2 remaining. So looks like I was off there a bit, so my apologies on that.
You actually might be right. That was the most recent that I had. Miguel was going to give an update today, so he might have corrected me rather than you.
Okay. Well, Miguel, are you able to join the discussion now? Okay, it looks like Miguel's still having technical difficulties. My apologies, Miguel, if that's something on our end. Let's move to item number 9, which is just simply acknowledgement of our next meeting of the GSA. That'll be held on May 12th, 1:30 p.m. And again, the platform will continue to be Zoom for the foreseeable future. Item number 10, items too late for the agenda. Are there any items too late for the GSA agenda today? Okay, if none, let's adjourn the GSA meeting and convene the Stanislaus and Tuolumne Rivers Groundwater Basin Association Technical Advisory Committee. The time is 1:45. We'll call the meeting to order. Is there any public comment today? Okay, seeing none. Let's move to item number 3, which is approval of our March 10, 2021 meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Renfro motion.
Thank you, sir. In a second.
I'll second it again.
Thank you, Eric. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. There he is.
Aye.
Okay. The motion's carried and the minutes are approved. Let's move to item number 4 now, which is between 4 and 5. That'll be the meat of our discussion today, and I'm thankful that we have ample time to cover these 2 items. First up is climate change modeling and the results from our climate change analysis. Phyllis, it looks like you're ready to kick us off before we turn it over to the technical folks.
I am. Thanks very much. So just to remind the group, one of the requirements of the GSP is to evaluate potential impacts of climate change on our projected future baseline analysis. DWR provides this guidance for the analysis. They provide various assumptions and factors related to temperature, solar radiation, stream flow, watershed runoff, etc. And Woodard and Curran, our modeling team, has incorporated these factors into a modeling scenario to be presented today. While we go through this analysis, I'd like for all of us to remember that these results document conditions without any projects or management actions, which are certainly going to be part of our GSP. So I just want to say that this is not what we expect to happen. We're going to manage these conditions going forward. But it does provide us with at least some planning level targets to help guide our volumes and aquifer response as we're putting together the GSP projects for this project. We also recognize that there are uncertainties associated with the scenario, especially given the nature of the global and regional models that feed into our analysis. And so accordingly, again, just looking at this as a planning level assessment of what impacts climate change may have on our GSP. So at this time, with those caveats in mind, I'd like to turn it over to Dominic Amador, who's going to be presenting the analysis and the results.
Awesome, thank you, Phyllis. Thank you. So as Phyllis mentioned, today we're going to kind of walk everybody through the kind of the technical aspects of the climate change scenario. What are the regulatory requirements that we have to meet with this analysis, kind of the methodology, the approach, the assumptions that we undertook to get us the results that we're going to take a look at towards the end, and then kind of dive into some of the data, both the input data as far as what are some of the things that we're expecting to change, how they're going to be affecting our subbasin, basically the climatal data that we have, so both precipitation, solar radiation, ET, things like that, and then we'll dive into, well, what does that mean for our aquifer system, and how does that then play into the GSP? So to dive right into that, the first step, and really the really reason, the driver for this analysis, is that there is a DWR, there is a SGMA regulation, a need to incorporate, to at least evaluate some aspect of climate change. And so what I have here is kind of effectively some of the wording kind of directly out of the legislative work under SGMA that really kind of targets really is what we need to take into consideration under climate change, and effectively kind of lays out the pathway that we need to take. And so really here, I've highlighted some of the kind of more important features that are kind of spelled out in the SGMA regulations, as far as we need to look at a 50-year period overall under a climate change condition. And so, some of the things that we need to take into consideration are precipitation, evapotranspiration, changes in stream flow, particularly being a surface water dependent subbasin. And we need to be able to take a look at how we're anticipating our basin to change. And so effectively what that means is that we're going to be applying some of these adjustment factors to our basin baseline scenario that we've kind of walked through in previous meetings, and we're going to be able to take a look at some of the differences between that baseline that we have without climate change, and then effectively add some of the climate change conditions on top of it, just to see, really do kind of a sensitivity to see what our basing could potentially show. And as Phyllis mentioned, precursor to this is, this is just we're going to be taking a look at one particular climate change scenario. We acknowledge that there are lots of options, lots of uncertainties associated with climate change, but being a regulatory requirement, we are going to take a look at effectively what DWR recommends. So kind of on the heels of that, really the goal of this entire analysis is just to meet that regulatory requirement, and to really be able to kind of understand where some of the uncertainty is with our projected conditions. And really the goal of this is to kind of just in general understand what one of those scenarios or one of those options are going to be when it comes to simulating climate change conditions, not only for our subbasin, but for the upper watersheds as well, particularly for the San Joaquin, the Tuolumne, and the Stanislaus rivers, and figure out how those are going to affect our surface water operations. So effectively, how do we do that? Well, this diagram here is kind of a big picture of the entire process. This is kind of the precursor to what we're going to get into today. So how is climate change, and how are some of the variables associated with climate change? How are they determined, and how are they calculated? Well, the whole process is a series of models that really start with an emissions scenario. And so really what we're actually going to end up doing today is, for the sake of efficiency, we're going to be relying on DWR, the Department of Water Resources, on a statewide scale, does basically steps 1 through 5 for us. And so for the sake of efficiency, we're going to be taking a look at some of the resources that they have available, and be able to implement the data that is provided by the state, implement into our localized groundwater and operations models, and kind of effectively refine some of the data that the DWR puts in, and then finally determine what it is in our groundwater model. But as I mentioned, this really all starts with an emission scenario, and it's set in a form of taking a series of several climate change simulations, and to really determine kind of a global look at what are the emissions. And from there, there's a form of spatial downscaling, that where we kind of take the big picture global changes that we're going to see on that scale. We downscale that to kind of get at some of our local conditions. And so, and from that form of spatial downscaling, there's really kind of two main components here. There's a hydrologic model that's called the VIC hydrologic model, that can give us our direct climatic data, particularly evapotranspiration and precipitation. And then in addition to that, there's also going to be use of the state operations model, CalSim2, to refine some of our local surface water deliveries, and really kind of be able to determine what kind of changes can we expect. And so effectively what we do is we take the data from steps 4 and steps 5 here, which are provided by DWR, and we put those into number 6, our groundwater model. So to kind of give you guys a little kind of another look at kind of that same process, this is a diagram that was developed by DWR, and you can see here that really of all the steps that I just spoke to, as far as the complexities associated with climate change, a lot of the uncertainties, really the first several steps of that are developed by the Department of Water Resources. And so as I mentioned, in looking at kind of everything from the global climate models, looking at the hydrologic models, these first steps here, we're going to basically take data and rely on the Department of Water Resources to give us some of that information, and we're going to finally implement those into this bottom box here, which is our GSA level groundwater model. And so the one kind of caveats to this, as far as this general flow diagram that is recommended by the state, are these two boxes here. And so effectively, these two dark blue boxes are where we kind of have locally refined information. So this we're slightly diverting from DWR's kind of statewide analysis, because they are effectively doing this analysis on their own. The idea being that we're going to take just the core CalSim2, which is a statewide reservoir operations model, and the C2V Sim, the base version of C2V Sim, and we're going to kind of adjust the numbers associated with those, both with our surface water and our groundwater operations, with local models. And so effectively, what that means is all the effort that we've done developing a localized historical model and the baseline model, all the local data that we've been able to have this support to develop, we're going to basically be utilizing our much more refined models to be able to get a much more accurate picture than what kind of the state would have at a base level. But overall, the methodology that the state recommends is what we've elected to kind of move forward with as far as being able to determine what water budgets would look like under climate change. Okay, so with that being said, as far as diving into some of the input data. So again, this is the data that we received from DWR. And when it comes to precipitation, as I mentioned earlier, precipitation has a hydrologic component, is going to be developed by the VIC model. And the VIC model is a statewide model that determines precipitation on a 4-kilometer grid. And that's kind of the grid you see here. And really what it's kind of showing us here is that climate change will impact the system very differently on a kind of a spatial scale. And so what you can see here is that there is that variability between, particularly here, probably one of the major drivers is going to be, just the elevation and some of the weather patterns that show that variation between the valley floor and our upper watershed here. But what we can see overall when we're taking a look at this figure and then looking at some of the numbers behind this figure is that in general, our overall precipitation in the basin under the 2070 climate change conditions, precipitation is going to go up. So what that means is that effectively what we're seeing is on average in our upper watershed, we're going to see about a 9% increase in overall precipitation. Now that precipitation, it doesn't anticipate coming at a different time of the year and in different volumes, and I'll get into a couple of slides, but overall on average, we're going to see about a 9% increase in precipitation. And then in addition to that, on the lower watershed, which is really the valley floor, effectively our subbasin, we're going to see an overall increase of about 13% when it comes to the total precipitation. Now that volume of precipitation isn't going to be consistent. It's not going to. The idea is that it's not going to be the same time of the year or from year to year. It's not. We're not going to see the exact same patterns that we have, or just a flat 3% increase. But when we take a look at the kind of the statistical approach, is that overall we're going to see some months. Effectively, these dots here is a data point of a 1 month adjustment factor, and in some months, what we're going to see is that some months are going to see a reduction in precipitation, and others we're going to see overall a increase in precipitation, which you see up here above the axis. But overall, we're going to see that in general, that precipitation on a monthly basis is going to be more common. So we're going to see an increase, which is why we are going to see that, at least on the basin floor, we'll see that 13% overall increase. And so that's going to bring from our projected conditions from that 50-year baseline from an average of 15 inches a year in the basin to about 16.2 inches of precipitation each year. So then to give you an idea as to not only kind of what is the temporal aspects of that, both on an annual basis we have here on the left, and then kind of the monthly distribution on the right. But the first target to take a look at the annual precipitation is what we will see in general is that most years will either be the same or more precipitation. There are very few instances in which we will see a significant decrease in precipitation on an annual basis. Now, the caveat to that, though, is that when we take a look at this right-hand figure, when it comes to when does that precipitation occur, is really what you can see here is that we are significantly drier in both the fall and in the summer and late spring, early summer months. And really all the precipitation, the variation that we're going to be seeing is going to be in the middle of winter. Now, that has its own challenges with it, particularly when it comes to reservoir operations, runoff, the amount of stream operation, stream flow that we have in the river system. In addition to that, we also being as due to solar radiation and temperatures increasing under climate change, one of the main components that we're going to see is not only does it rain earlier in the year, but also due to that increase in temperature, we're going to see snow melting earlier in the year. And so that does provide a challenge, particularly for the irrigation districts when it comes to reservoir operations, is to effectively how to handle that those changes in precipitation, and as far as how to best operate the reservoirs. And I do know that is something that I know that each of the irrigation districts within the basin are working fairly tirelessly when it comes to kind of how to be flexible and to be able to account for some of these changes that we're going to see. So when it comes to the other major component that's going to be driving a lot of our groundwater conditions is evapotranspiration. Now, evapotranspiration is effectively what is the consumptive use, particularly in agriculture, but is also going to affect our native and our urban areas as well. But what is the change in the evaporation coming out of our system? And so really what we're going to see here is that due to that increase in temperature, due to the increases in increases in temperature and increases in solar radiation, we are going to see an overall increase in evapotranspiration. Now, this is going to affect to a degree offset some of that precipitation that we see when it comes to the native areas in the upper watersheds. And that's the 6% increase in evapotranspiration to a degree, not entirely, but it will offset some of that additional precipitation. But then particularly in the lower system within our groundwater basin, we're going to see about an 8% increase on average of evapotranspiration. Now, this is really going to drive not only our kind of the naturally occurring ET, but we're also this is going to drive a lot of our changes in agricultural demand. And so what we anticipate with seeing with a lot of this ET changes is that we're going to have to change some of our operations such in order to kind of facilitate the increased stresses on the overall system to account for that increased water demand from our crops. So similar to precipitation, when it comes to an annual basis, we're going to see kind of a very consistent increase in overall. About that 8% increase is fairly consistent on a year-to-year basis. There is some variability, but it's fairly minor. Now, on the other hand, when it comes to this monthly breakdown, what we can see actually in almost a complete opposite to our precipitation, we're going to see the majority of our increases to evapotranspiration into the summer months. And so this is going to be particularly relevant when it comes to that agriculture demand and being able to meet our crop requirements, our irrigation requirements, and our operations under the climate change scenarios. And so really what we can see here is that overall, we're going to see an increase in evapotranspiration, an increase in demand, and we need to be able to account for that in the model. Now, the last major component that was really going to change heavily under as far as input data under climate change is effectively what to do with our stream system. Now, whereas the previous two, precipitation and ET, really come from the VIC model, the stream system is a little bit more complex, given that the two major rivers that we have are really all three major rivers, but the two that drive a lot of our surface water deliveries and our surface water availability, the Stanislaus and the Tuolumne rivers, are very heavily regulated. We have reservoir systems controlling a lot of the stream inflow, and because of that, those operations, we're using kind of an adjustment off of the CalSim 2 model, which is the state's version of a reservoir operations model that kind of simulates statewide reservoir operations and stream, both our surface water deliveries and the stream inflows into our model area. So we're going to see here, when taking a look at these two, the adjustment that we're making when it comes to looking at the CalSim model is that really what we're doing is we're utilizing the same adjustment factors that CalSim does, because CalSim does forecast some changes in the rules associated with reservoir operations that are not necessarily as part of the direct rule curves that the districts follow when and other regulatory requirements the districts have to follow when it comes to their surface water operations. And so we're really utilizing some of the kind of more simplified rules and adjustment factors that CalSim does to utilize to apply those change factors to some of the historical data and some of the baseline data that we have, which is really more strongly based on local records, local simulations, rather than utilizing the state's operations. So effectively, what we have when utilizing these CalSim adjustment factors is we get two main components here. Now, predominantly for the Modesto subbasin, we have the stream inflow off the Tuolumne, the Stanislaus, and the San Joaquin rivers. In addition to that, because we kind of are sharing a localized groundwater model, we're sharing that with the Turlock subbasin. We're also simulating and performing this analysis directly simulating the Merced River as well. And so even though it's a little bit less directly affecting our system, I just wanted to let everybody make sure everybody knew that we're including that as well in our analysis. In addition to that, we also have surface water deliveries that are being adjusted as far as looking at our overall operations and for each of the districts. And so for Turlock, Modesto, Oakdale, Merced, as well as any riparian diversions that are off of each of these rivers, are all being adjusted to some degree to account for the climate change conditions and the availability of surface water to meet our agricultural demand. So what does that do with our stream inflow? And so really what I have here is a figure for showing both the stream inflow. So this is effectively what is coming in to our basin from the east for the Tuolumne and the Stanislaus River. And what we can see here, indicative of those precipitation patterns we talked about earlier, is what we'd anticipate to see is higher highs and lower lows. It's kind of a very common theme when it comes to a lot of climate change modeling, is that in general, because we have these components where the precipitation, while in general it's more, it does come so much earlier in the year. Really what we have is more water has to be released into the rivers in the wintertime to account for some of the flood flow and flood operations. And in drought years and in lower flow conditions, what we end up seeing is less stream water available. So these rivers are going to be naturally flowing into in each of these rivers. So then, well, how does that affect our surface water deliveries and our surface water supply when we to meet our demands within the basin? Well, really what we can see here is this is on the left-hand side, I have the total surface water deliveries in the basin. So this is Modesto, Oakdale, and those riparian diverters, the combination of all the surface water delivery we have. And what we can see when compare the projected conditions baseline in this kind of light green color here, in general, comparatively to the climate change projection, there will be, in general, less surface water available to meet our demand. And we can kind of see that kind of effectively a zoomed in version of that, these changes here on the right, where we see the changes in surface water availability. And particularly what we can see here is that in periodic years, we anticipate to see, in general, about a few percent less. But there will be periodic years due to the operations, due to when that precipitation comes and the operations of the reservoir system, we can see up to I would say about an 8% decline in surface water availability from at the highest point. So what does that look like and how does that affect our system as a whole? So at this point, these are going to take the next couple of slides are going to be looking at water budgets associated with the system as a whole. These are effectively outputs of our groundwater model. But before we get into the groundwater system, the first component that I wanted to take a look at is what does our water use structure look like? And so particularly here, we have the first third of this figure being the historical simulation. Now we've gone over this a few times in the past, different TAC meetings, but effectively this historical simulation is what we've seen in the past 25 years. Now, and then moving forward on the right-hand side of this figure, we see what we're projecting under various scenarios over the next 50 years, which is that regulatory timeline that we need to look at. But really what we can see here is that overall, comparatively to the baseline, that increase in evapotranspiration is something we're going to see comparatively to our ETAW, particularly when our agricultural crops, the ET of applied water is going to go up about 8%. Very similarly to that, not entirely, but very similar to that 8% increase means our total agricultural demand has to be increased by about 8% too, depending on our irrigation efficiencies within the subbasin. Now, in order to meet that demand, we have two forms of supply. The first is surface water. Now, when we look at a long-term 50-year average, we see 99% or just under 99% of our long-term surface water availability. Now, in order to make up the differential between our evapotranspiration, our increase of evapotranspiration of 8% and the decrease of our surface water availability, we do have to make up for that demand somewhere. And that demand is going to be made up for in groundwater. And so what we're going to see overall is about a 14% in our groundwater pumping across the basin. Now this is really meant to effectively offset the differential between our surface water and our increased demand comparatively to our baseline. So what does that mean for our groundwater system? Because we will effectively, what we have is we have an increase in our groundwater stresses. And effectively that 14% pumping, what you can see here comparatively to our baseline, our projected conditions baseline, this gray color here, which is our groundwater pumping, is going to be increased on average that 14%. And so what we can see here is that of that pumping, there is an efficiency associated. So we will see a slight increase in our deep percolation. But overall, the additional stresses from under climate change have to come from somewhere, and additional water has to come from somewhere. So to a degree, there will be changes in our groundwater storage. We'll see additional declines in groundwater storage under climate change, and we will see particularly we will see additional increases in some of these subsurface flows and our stream aquifer interaction. So effectively, what's going to happen is that whenever demand goes up, whether that is through climate change or whether that's through increased acreage or anything else, or increased production or anything else, the more pumping that we do, that water comes from somewhere. That water usually comes from storage, or it comes from our stream system as we induce additional declines in water levels. So, but really taking a look at what is our kind of our change in storage, really focusing on the big component here, is what we can see here overall is that while fairly similar, particularly in pattern, we do still see, effectively the higher highs and the lower lows, very similar to our stream system. When there is on a very wet year, we're going to see a lot of additional recharge here, and that's in the negative direction. But a lot of that recharge is particularly offset by the increased demand that we have. On the other hand, in the positive direction here, because this is a reduction in storage, we have in these positive years here are effectively when we are pulling more and more water out of the stream system. So comparatively, particularly let's see these early years, you can see here on these two figures that we are pulling more water out of out of our groundwater system, which means that our groundwater levels will decline at a faster rate comparatively to our projected conditions. So overall, while they are fairly consistent, we will see still several thousand overall over the 50-year period. We'll still see several thousand acre feet of decline on an annual basis, on a consistent average basis. So what does that mean overall when it comes to our operations and kind of how we're going to handle the basin under climate change? Well, to really quickly kind of summarize the slides we had showed before, is overall from a land perspective, there's going to be an increase in agricultural demand due to higher ET rates, due to temperature increases, solar radiation increases. Our crops are going to want to transpire more, grow faster, and because of that, our agricultural demand is going to increase. In addition to that, due to the kind of the surface water dynamics associated with precipitation, is that we will see more overall precipitation, but our surface water supply is going to decline a slight amount. And that is particularly due to the balance of more water basically falling from the sky, but it falling from the sky earlier in the year, and additional snow melt earlier in the year, and some of the rules associated with that, and how those reservoir operations are going to take place. And then in order to meet that overall demand, that increased demand with the changes in surface water supply, so that we anticipate seeing a higher need for groundwater production. And with that higher groundwater production, as far as when we take a look into the groundwater system, is that overall we're going to see declining groundwater levels at a faster rate than we would see otherwise without climate change. And in addition to to decreases in storage, and actually very related to that, decreases in overall storage, we do anticipate seeing increases in stream seepage due to the lowering of groundwater levels. So effectively, well, really, what does that mean to us? And maybe it's probably a little bit more of a discussion item too here, is that overall, this scenario that we ran is really one of really many potential climate change scenarios. There's a lot of uncertainties associated with climate change, the intensity, and really how our system will react. In addition to there just being uncertainties associated with what the climate will do, there's a lot of dependency on reservoir operations being such a surface water dependent subbasin, and we're very blessed to have that additional supply. But as you can see, based on some of the precipitation numbers that we came through comparatively to surface water availability, there's a lot of uncertainties with what the future will hold for us as far as reservoir operations, and really being able to kind of adaptively manage that surface water supply in the long term. So really overall, the kind of the big take home of this is that the climate change scenario is a regulatory requirement under SGMA. It's something we must include in our GSP. But really the GSP itself, and as far as how we probably want to move forward with this from a policy perspective, is that the GSP is really the goal of this is to focus on this idea of adaptive management because of some of those uncertainties. Because as Phyllis mentioned earlier, this scenario, this is scenario, particularly with the need for increasing groundwater production, it doesn't include any projects, any management actions. And particularly when we know that the precipitation, the surface water availability is going to is such a critical role in our operations. And there's so much opportunity there, particularly to capture some of that more winter time precipitation, is that there's a lot of opportunity there, and that those operations are going to have a significant impact in our space and sustainability. And this model doesn't, as currently set out, does not take into account any of those projects and management actions. So then in addition to that, we know that the districts that operate those reservoirs are actively working together to really optimize that surface water ability, to not have to lose too much of it, particularly for flood control reasons. And and we're going to be working effectively working together as a team to really be able to optimize that moving forward into the system, and that will be something we can take into consideration. And the final item we hear is that there are a lot of limitations with this analysis, and particularly being a lot of the uncertainty associated. But really, I think one of the main take homes to this analysis is to show, particularly when we look into things like those, when we looked at things like the precipitation, the fact that overall we have more water in the system, and it may be a challenge to be able to utilize that, but it does show some insight into kind of some of the potential opportunities we have to really for those sustainability actions we talked about. And so I know there's a lot of discussion when it comes to our the managed aquifer recharge programs and things to that effect. And so those are really going to play a pivotal role. Those projects and management actions are going to play a pivotal role in really how we achieve our sustainability with or without climate change. Okay, so with that, are there any questions or comments or anything I can answer?
Well, thank you, Dominic. That's been helpful. I think what was most helpful for me was were the two slides at the end that really put it into perspective. Specifically regarding projects and the fact that this analysis does not include any projects. And so, again, like you and Phyllis, I think that's of value. I have an additional question, but before I ask my question, are there again, let's start with member agencies. Are there questions amongst the member agencies? Now's your opportunity to ask Dominic any questions you may have. Okay. Thank you. While folks are pondering potential questions, how about any members of the public? Any questions from the public? Yeah, Director Mensinger, go ahead.
So I find the presentation interesting and good. I have a couple of questions here. One, when you talk about more precipitation and earlier snowmelt, you're sort of suggesting there'll be more water in the river because the dams will have to release the water. And I can understand that on the Tuolumne, but I can't understand it on the Stanislaus because New Melones is a massive reservoir, which is almost never at capacity. Mm-hmm. So have you factored that into your assumptions?
So I think this really highlights where a lot of the uncertainties in this analysis are, particularly given the fact that the reservoir operations and the basis of us utilizing a lot of the resources that we have available to us, as far as in this case particularly utilizing the CalSim2 model to simulate the reservoir operations, was that we do, from the groundwater model perspective, since we are not a direct reservoir operations system, I do have to rely on a lot of the rules and methodologies that the state is utilizing for those reservoirs. And so basically, the CalSim, for anybody that isn't aware, CalSim2 utilizes a set of rule curves associated with water demand, some of the state regulations that they have as far as stream inflow, reservoir capacity, and sorry, I'm blanking on flood control. Sorry, I don't know why that was one I had to forget. But effectively, there's a set of rules that operate the reservoir system under that. And so, and really kind of why I wanted to really focus in on the uncertainties associated with that is that I definitely agree that this is a very big picture when taking a look at these, but The state does have a kind of a set of rules associated with how those reservoirs are operated, and we're just mimicking those rules. And so I really can't speak too much directly to how that reservoir is operated today, or how it's going to be operated, and the the requirements of how the reservoir is going to be operated, whether that's tomorrow or whether that's under climate change conditions.
Well,
Much further into the future.
We know that the state is constantly going to change the way they regulate rivers, and that includes dams. But really, given that our little groundwater basin here only has 2 rivers, and Stanislaus is a very important river, and New Malone is a very unique dam. First of all, it's operated by the feds, not the state. And interestingly enough, they release so much water from it now for environmental purposes. That's one reason why it always, in other words, it might fill up to capacity once every 10 or 15 years. So it really requires, if your analysis is going to be accurate, it requires a deep understanding of how this particular reservoir is operated. And likewise, on the Tuolumne, our system is kind of a unique system too, because you have the reservoirs operated by the city and county of San Francisco, and they then drop water into Don Pedro, into our water bank. And for sure at Don Pedro, it's believable that with climate change, more precipitation, earlier snowmelt, that you'll end up having water released early from Don Pedro that can't be used for irrigation because it flows down the river. That might be a better fit, but again, it's kind of a unique river system because of all those different dams. So I think that given that we're trying to do this groundwater sustainability plan for our own basin, I think that we need to understand what's going on with these rivers. And then the final comment I wanted to make, there was a chart that showed sort of the decrease in surface water deliveries, and it looked like it was that, in other words, it looked like many years there was no decrease, and then other years it was sort of a relatively modest amount, 10,000 acre feet, 20,000 acre feet. And I just speaking for the Modesto Irrigation District, we basically deliver everything our customers needs, or we really go low. In other words, we deliver like half of what they need, or 2/3 of what they need. So and we deliver on average, I think, 150 to 200,000 acre feet a year. It's confusing because you've got, you divert so much and only so much ends up, going to the farmer. But so I just find that chart a little bit odd.
Well, I'll just offer a couple of thoughts on Director Mensinger's comments, and I think the nuances related to reservoir operations and specific to Maloney's in terms of the overall capacity, to me the comments underscore 2 things. One, as Dominic and Phyllis have said, this is but just one climate change sort of tool in the tool chest. And then second, that I think it underscores, again, Director Mensinger, your comment, the importance of the local surface water providers working together to maximize our available resources and further our understanding and development of climate change tools. Right? I mean, this is an important item to keep in front of us as we move forward.
Thank you.
I don't see any additional hands up from the public. So Dominic, just one question remains from me, and that is, how does the methodology that we're using here with respect to the DWR sort of process and input data relate to what's being done in our neighboring subbasins? Is it the same approach to the south, same approach to the north, different? Where do we fall?
Absolutely. So particularly when it comes to the east side of the Central Valley in our particular neighbors, we're actually using the exact same overall approach to climate change as effectively Eastern San Joaquin, Modesto, Turlock, Merced, are all in our vicinity, are all using the exact same approach to climate change. Exact same methodology. In fact, a lot of the input data that you're seeing was particularly directly taken from part of some of the modeling efforts that were undertaken for each of their GSPs. In addition to that, whereas we do have a different complete overall model from Eastern San Joaquin, the Turlock subbasin, we share a groundwater model with the Turlock subbasin. So in addition to looking at the overall methodology, as far as the approach, as far as some of the factors that go into their simulation, it is the same model using the same information, same data, and that we really have really close direct coordination with each of the subbasins that we're operating under or operating with. And so yeah, very, very strong consistency across all of our neighbors.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad to hear that. I think that, there's so much uncertainty in all of this that, the ability to bring some level of consistency is welcome. So thank you for that. Okay, if there are no further questions for Dominic, let's move to item number 5 on the TAC agenda, which is an update from, a discussion from Phyllis with respect to the GSP monitoring network. Phyllis, are you there? If you might be muted, we can't hear you.
Yes, I am here, and I am waiting for, it thinks I'm sharing, so I'm going to try this again.
We can see it, I think.
Oh, good. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. I for some reason, I can't see it. So good for you. Okay, I just have a couple of slides. I wanted to take any remaining time that we have today to just begin to introduce some of the things that we're going to be going through in detail in the coming weeks. And one of the things that we're going to be doing is to selecting our sustainable management criteria. And part of the sustainable management criteria process is to determine monitoring networks. And I think that even though the process really is define undesirable results, select your sustainable management criteria, and then select the wells that you're planning to monitor, and in particular, your representative wells. But in some ways, we've seen in other subbasins that if we begin to do it all together, especially if we already have a monitoring network in place that's providing us some good information, then that gives us an opportunity to sort of combine some thoughts at the same time that we are considering the sustainable management criteria. So with that, I just wanted to take a couple of slides and introduce what we're thinking with respect to monitoring networks. Here's a table that we have with some of the criteria that I've thought about when selecting representative monitoring wells in this subbasin. Access is a big one. And really the candidates that you see on this table were first developed just because we already have access to these wells, and access usually means some historical information. So those two things are very helpful for us in pulling a lot of the information that we're going to be for the sustainable management criteria together. In particular, we've got the CASGEM program, which really is robust in this subbasin, more robust perhaps than in some of your neighboring subbasins. You routinely monitor 50 wells within this subbasin. You have relatively good coverage. We have a few areas that are data gaps, but for the most part, we have good coverage across the subbasin. We have access to those wells, and importantly, we know the construction information. We know the depth for all of them. We know detailed screen information for almost all of them. And this gives us a good understanding of how the aquifer is responding to these depths and these aquifer systems. The one downside with the CASGEM program is, for the most part, these are active water supply wells. In particular, most are irrigation. And the reason that this is not as desirable as a dedicated monitoring well is that, of course, the well owner needs to use this well. There's pumping in this well, and that affects the local pumping water levels. And so what we're trying to do in the GSP and SGMA in general is look at regional subbasin water levels. So we're not so interested in what's going on within a particular well as we are what's going on in the aquifer system outside and away from those wells. Nonetheless, when these wells are not active, they provide really valuable information for us. And for the most part, we monitor these wells when they have been in an inactive position. construction. So again, the CASGEM program is really an excellent subset of candidate wells for our GSP monitoring network. In addition, we have some USGS installed wells. There are 30 individually screened wells at 12 locations. And so what this tells us, the fact that there's more wells than locations, tells us that we have the opportunity to evaluate vertical flow within the aquifer system. So these are valuable for us on a detailed basis. They're limited in access right now. Even though they were drilled primarily in and around the city of Modesto, USGS has not sort of signed over title yet, even though they're not continuing to monitor them now. So we're working on this. The city has been in contact with USGS, and there's a lot of detailed sort of Q&A going back and forth between USGS personnel and our group in terms of trying to gain access to these wells on a long-term basis. We have excellent construction information, but only limited water level data. And again, the real kicker for us is that they are dedicated monitoring wells, providing both horizontal and vertical flow information. So we're trying hard to get these incorporated into the GSP monitoring network. The city of Modesto has also drilled individual dedicated monitoring wells, and they also have looked at these wells with respect to vertical discretization. So even if we can't get access to all of the USGS wells, we do have access to the city of Modesto's wells. There are 19 individual clusters of wells at 5 locations. And this also provides additional information for us because in the city of Modesto, you might recall that we've defined 2 aquifer systems in the west, the upper aquifer above the Corcoran clay and the lower aquifer below the Corcoran clay. So this gives us an opportunity to monitor 2 principal aquifers, these wells that have discrete monitoring networks within the vertical discretization of the aquifer system. And also that these are dedicated monitoring wells is a plus for us in that they are not pumped. We again have only limited historical water level data for those, but we have other wells nearby. And so we are working to look at nearby wells where we have historical information and tie that back to where we have access to dedicated monitoring wells and pull those into the network in that manner. In addition, as we had updated everyone previously, we're drilling 16 additional wells at 10 locations in association with our ongoing grant funded through Proposition 68 and administered by the Department of Water Resources. That program is ongoing and we're getting some data gaps filled, especially in the eastern portion of the subbasin. We will have access to these wells, of course, because the GSAs are installing them, and we will have excellent construction information because we're on location watching the wells being constructed, and we designed them in the beginning. So these provide really excellent information with respect to areas that we aren't previously monitoring. And because they are dedicated monitoring wells, again, we will be able to incorporate them easily and readily into the GSP program. The downside, of course, is that we're just putting them in. So, of course, we're going to have no historical information. So once again, we'll be looking at surrogate wells nearby that have information that might give us the opportunity to set minimum thresholds and measurable objectives at these wells, even though we have limited historical data. So that's a summary of the wells. You're very fortunate, I'll say, for most of the subbasins that I've been working in the Central Valley. We don't quite have this sort of nice network of candidate wells already in place. The CASGEM program, of course, has been ongoing for all of the subbasins, but yours is particularly robust with respect to the number of wells, the coverage of wells, and also the historical information being compiled. And then finally, I've listed, in addition to our wells, 3 potential additional candidate monitoring sites that we have the opportunity, if we wish to, pull into our monitoring networks. And in particular, this would be for subsidence. These are the Scripps Oceanic program has through UNAVCO global positioning sites stations throughout California. These are in place for a variety of reasons. I know everyone is very familiar that the state of California is very tectonically active with a lot of geological faults, and we have earth movement going on right now as we speak in this state. As a result of that, we have a lot of federal and local agencies that are particularly interested in monitoring the vertical displacement of ground surface throughout the state. This provides a lot of great information from a tectonic standpoint, but it also gives us an understanding of vertical ground displacement that might be inelastic land subsidence associated with groundwater withdrawals. And in those areas, we want to pay particular attention to what the GPS data are over time. So these are monitored by others, of course, but we have access to those data. Most of these data are provided on a website and can be readily downloaded over time. We do know how they're constructed. We know where they are, and we know benchmark locations. Of course, they don't provide any water level data, and they're not wells, so there isn't a well use, but they do provide another opportunity for us to look at vertical displacement and monitoring. And then I just have
Hey, Phyllis?
Yes, Walt.
This is Walt. Hey, do they use and share the same common vertical datum?
Yes. Yes.
Good.
They are all, these are all the same. I think two of them are the same, monitored by exactly the same agency, but the third is coordinated with them. They're all part of the same program.
Great.
So those are our candidate monitoring sites. Now, certainly there are other wells in the subbasin, and there are other potential ways to monitor. But because we have information, both access and construction and historical water level information for many of these wells, they really are the first tier candidates. So let's just look at some of the coverage of those wells. We've looked at this before, but I don't think we've had everything on one map. So maybe this will be helpful for everyone to get a sense. Our CASGEM wells are the 50 wells that I talked about that are in yellow, again, providing pretty good coverage. Agreed that they are concentrated, most of them in the west, but we do have subbasin coverage. Certainly in the east, we don't have the coverage we'd like, but with respect to the increased production areas and the areas that are of greatest concern, we do have some good data in the east, and we are supplementing those data with our Proposition 68 monitoring well program. These 1, 2, 3, 4 wells have already been constructed and are already in place, and we have static water level for the initial installation for those wells. So this is already something that we are moving forward with. We still are drilling a couple of the wells down here, as mentioned additionally, and we're hoping to even get another well close to the river in the area of Empire. So those red wells and the yellow wells collectively already provide sort of a good basin-wide look on first approach. Now, over time, adaptive management means that we are going to be selecting areas where we really need additional information with respect to aquifer response. And I'm sure there will be a need for additional wells in the future, but it's a good first start. I also mentioned the City of Modesto wells and the USGS wells as being dedicated monitoring wells. Those are clustered here in the city. You can see the green ones being all of these USGS wells that I mentioned that have the discrete vertical intervals in them. And then the City of Modesto monitoring wells are shown here in blue. And Miguel has not only graciously spent his time and his staff's time getting the information from those monitoring wells to us, they're also working with USGS, as are we, to see if access to these green wells might be available to us also. Those 3 UNAV code GPS stations that I mentioned are along Highway 99, and they are shown by these orange diamonds. It doesn't provide full coverage over this area, but we do have some wells that we will be looking at to supplement that information as needed. We haven't quite gotten to the point where we've talked about how many representative monitoring points are going to be necessary for the upper and the lower principal aquifers in the area, but we have a good start on candidate wells. And so the last slide that I have puts some of the DWR icons for the sustainability indicators on the map. And this sort of gives us a beginning roadmap as to how these candidate monitoring wells and monitoring sites might fit into our sustainability indicators. The 2 that are shown at the top here represent chronic lowering of water level and reduction of groundwater and storage. Those are sub-basin wide issues for us. And so we will be, of course, looking in particular in areas where water level declines have been exacerbated. But for the most part, we're going to be looking at these 2 sustainability indicators basin-wide, whereas some of the other sustainability indicators are going to be areally focused. For example, the interconnected surface water will need to monitor as close as we can on a reasonable basis along the Stanislaus and the Tuolumne rivers and the San Joaquin River as well. And so the wells that are very close to the river will be important to us to incorporate as representative monitoring wells. You will recognize as we begin to go through the process, you may begin to say, well, you don't have that many wells along the river. You know, there's sort of a data gap here, and there's some areas up in here where you don't have wells along the river. And so one of the things that is our charge is not only to make sure that we have good coverage, excuse me, but to make sure that the coverage matches what we're trying to monitor. So we will, there are some areas along the river that will be more key to us than others. And so we want to be sure that where we monitor is where we really need the data and the information. So there'll be a sort of matching of where we have wells versus what we're after with respect to monitoring. We will put the plan together based on that. We will move forward, and that information will inform us over time as to how well of a job we are able to document aquifer response, or if there's some areas where we really feel like we would recommend and need more information.
And
yes,
Phyllis, we'll coordinate that with the GSA entities across the rivers, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for pointing that out. That it is helpful to have these wells close to the river, but if you don't know what's happening here, you're still at a point where you really need to understand. Just because you might be able to say whether or not flow is moving toward or away from the river here doesn't help you know whether or not it's moving underneath the river in that area as well. So good point. Thank you, Walt. That's great. And then the final 2 sustainability indicators that I just hadn't mentioned yet, one being subsidence. That is generally going to be focused primarily. We have no, you might recall from many of our presentations before that we have no identified vertical displacement or land subsidence of issues, and we've certainly seen no impacts from any inelastic land subsidence in the subbasin to date. But we recognize that we have the Corcoran clay, which is a very plastic clay that has been documented as being related to land subsidence in areas to the south of us in some of the southern, more southern subbasins in the Central Valley. And because we have seen that was in many cases primarily correlated to dewatering of that clay and recompaction of that clay in the subsurface, we want to pay close attention to our subsidence monitoring program within this area where we have the Corcoran clay. So that's why I've put the sustainability.
Did we lose her?
Yeah, I don't know. Did we lose Phyllis?
It sounded like it.
Phyllis, if you can hear us, we can't hear you. I suppose the good news is that I think you're at the end of your presentation. Okay. Well, are there, I'd ask if there are questions, but
That was the
Phyllis,
last slide, she said.
yeah, Phyllis may not be able to answer them since we seem to have lost audio with her.
Telekinesis.
There you go. Okay, Phil, looks like she's gone. Maybe she's going to rejoin. We can give her just a minute. While we can bounce back up to any questions and or comments folks may have regarding item number 5. Let's just an update on item number 6. Our next meeting for the TAC is as we've customarily done, which is at 2 p.m. following our GSA meeting, which is scheduled next on May the 12th. Under items too late for the agenda, I think Miguel, if the group would allow me to do so, is there anything that you wanted to add with respect to the monitoring wells? I know you had some audio issues there for a bit. Miguel, is there anything you want to add? Okay, we'll take that as a no. Okay, well, one of the questions that I had for Phyllis was where do we go from here with respect to the monitoring network? We can tee that question up for her at a later date. I don't see any questions from the public. And so are there any items, again, too late for the agenda that folks want to discuss today?
No, John, but I did have a question, and I'll go ahead and raise it so I don't forget it for Phyllis, is that when they're taking into consideration these monitoring wells, and she may very well be aware of it, but there isn't a wastewater treatment plant in the state of California that doesn't have monitoring wells in place. And typically that's water quality, but there's also information available there and probably information going back for 20, 30 years.
Okay.
So, and she may already be aware of it too. So, but I thought I'd just go ahead and raise that point.
Okay, no, that's a good point. I have a couple extra items to follow up on after the meeting today, so I'll add that to the list. Thank you, Mr. Riddell. Any other closing thoughts by folks? Okay, if there are none, again, we will see you all again on May the 12th, 1:30 for the GSA meeting, and then 2 p.m. for the TAC meeting. Thank you for your time today, both member agencies and members of the public, and have a good rest of your week. Take care.
All right, talk to you later.
John, thank you. I'll be out in Florida, but I'll have Cody Bridgewater, my alternate, attend, okay?
Okay, sounds fantastic. Thank you for the heads up.
Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.